Hi, all. It's Dr. Bree. Today we're going to talk a bit more about primates, specifically primate ecology and behavior. This is one of my favorite lectures. It is one of the longer ones, so I'm just going to get right into it. We'll start just by differentiating primatology from other animal studies. So people who study just animal behavior in general, those are called ethologists, and you can carry out an ethology, a study of those things. Primatology is a study specifically of primate behavior. People who study primates are called primatologists. I love when words make sense like that. They study primates, they're called primatologists. Beautiful. And primatologists, like all anthropologists and all scientists, they start with research questions. And depending on their research question, they might want to specifically study primates in the wild, they might want to study primates in captivity, or they might want to compare the two. It depends on the question you're asking, right? Because if you're interested in like natural innate behaviors, that's not really something you can quite factually glean from captive studies just because animals that live in captivity, they're not exposed to like specific smells or things that, humans are always intervening. So it's not like a pristine condition to carry out. If you really want to know innate behaviors that these animals are born with or that they rely on instinctually, especially when animals have been raised in captivity with human intervention, then they're going to have learned behaviors that are different than their wild counterparts. So it depends on the question that they're asking, which environment they prefer to study primates in. Um, Primatologists study primates to better understand our own, and by our, I mean humans in general, our own behaviors and actions and reactions through the comparative method, which is something that I mentioned, I believe, in our very first lecture about techniques that anthropologists use. The idea here is that our ancestors, they didn't have complex speech like we do now. They didn't have all these complex technological innovations that we have now. So our ancestors likely lived in a world and moved throughout the world in a way very similar to our current primate relatives. So we might be able to glean some natural human behaviors, some learned human behaviors. Actually, through studying primates, we tend to decenter how exceptional we think humans are. A lot of things that we do are also things that many of our primate relatives do. So, primatology is part of the field, anthropological field's commitment to a holistic approach, meaning that we try to answer our research questions looking through many different lenses. We might look at biology, sure. But we might also look at evolutionary history, and we might also look at learned behaviors, which are cultural things. We try to put all of those things together, and this is one aspect of that. Now, we can't talk about primatology without talking about one of probably the most famous primatologist of all time. And in fact, if you want to look up further or you want to go to the book Explorations and look into primatology further, you'll notice that the three most famous primatologists of all time are all women. Very cool because primatology is technically a STEM field. So to see it dominated by women is actually pretty impressive and awesome to see us represented in that way. Now, I'm going to tell you about some of the key contributions that Jane Goodall had to the field of primatology. But before Goodall, primatology studies were carried out quite differently. They tended to be short, meaning they lasted less than a year in duration, and they were very largely carried out in zoos or in captive environments. So when Jane Goodall arrived in Tanzania, which is located in Africa, in 1960, she was one of the very first scientists to conduct a long-term study of wild non-human primates. So she studied them in the wild for long term. So she's really diverging from the norm in primatology at this point. So by 1961, so only a year later, her commitment to a very long-term study in the wild had made some contributions that absolutely revolutionized the field by making us reconsider what actually differentiates us from other primates. Are we that special? And I'm going to tell you about two of her very key discoveries. So it is important to consider, sorry, that bullet was kind of out of order here, but it is important to consider what she could have learned. Like if she had carried out her long-term study in a captivity as opposed to out in the wild, she probably would not have learned these two things that I am about to show you. First, she observed chimpanzees eating a colobus monkey. I'm sorry for the slightly not great picture on the screen where we've got several chimpanzees. I think there are four, there might be five, but there are four chimpanzees that are attacking a colobus monkey, pulling it in different directions. This is just prior to them killing it and eating it. Now, you might think, okay, what's the big deal about that, right? Well, first, this was the very first reported evidence of meat eating in chimpanzees, who are our closest living relatives. They were previously thought to be vegetarians. So not only is she showing that that's not really the case, but two, as she's continuing to study them, she observes that they would work collaboratively together to hunt and share the meat. But chimpanzees have also been known to hunt, kill another, typically it's primates, kill another primate and then not eat it, which means that they're not motivated by hunger. They're not doing this because they have to. They're doing it for some other reason. Sometimes, sure, sometimes they are eating the monkey, so it is a sustenance thing, but other times it doesn't have, they don't eat it. So there must be something else going on there. But this is influential for another reason. Many anthropologists at the time, and maybe some of them, like maybe some people still think this, because it can be true to a degree, but people largely argued that our brains are so big because we figured out how to use fire and tools to eat meat. We were good hunters. And that gave us, enough calories, extra calories to be able to develop and sustain having a large, energetically hungry brain. But, so we could make that argument because we were like, well, look at all these other primate relatives. They don't eat meat to the degree that we do. Their brains are relatively small compared to ours. But now we've got evidence that chimps are not vegetarians. They do, in fact, hunt and kill other animals and eat their meat. But their brains are still significantly smaller than ours, like notably smaller than ours. So maybe it wasn't the meat eating that spurred us all the way to the humans that we recognize now. It could be, but we're casting some doubt into that situation. And that's what science is. It's iterative. It's let's collect all the evidence that we can. We'll make our best hypothesis at the time. But if we get new evidence, let's kind of reevaluate and change our perspective a little bit. Second very cool thing that Goodall observed is that she discovered that chimpanzees make and use tools. And this is kind of multi-coded here, cool on many different levels. Number one, they didn't just copy one another. You know how like a baby might mimic you if you're doing something, like it sees you moving pots and pans around, it will try to do that too. Well, these baby chimps weren't just imitating mom. They would start like that, but mom would, and typically it is mom, but mom would come in and mom would be like, no, you're doing that wrong. Like, let me correct you. You think you're doing it right, but there's a better technique. So there is active involved teaching going on here, which is totally different than mimicry, which is more of like an innate thing that we do without thinking about it. And so this was argued to constitute, the field is very divided on whether this actually constitutes culture or not. But for me, I think it's something to see that there's direction, that there's correction, and also that if you go to different chimpanzee communities, they make a number of tools, but they'll be making tools in different ways. So that means they've got regional differences, which tracks really closely to our definition of culture too. Now, it doesn't meet all the definition of culture, I would argue, because culture from our definition involves like symbolic thought, which means you've got to reference something that isn't like you reference something that's abstract, it's not a concrete physical item. And I don't know that that necessarily happens here. So think about like our art or music, that sort of thing. But I think it's a lot more culture than we had ever previously recognized. And so it's amazing to see how complex. So I'm going to show you just a brief video. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here, but where there is some tool teaching going on, and you can see how mom and baby interact when they're trying to learn how to make tools. So let me fast forward.
Families Baby chimpanzees spend years learning about each other and their traditions. Families are the schools. In Central Africa, chimps crack nuts with rocks. The trick is passed mother to baby down the generations. It's part of their culture. In East Africa, they catch termites using twigs. Babies watch and learn. They get the basics almost immediately. It's something to do with a stick. In some extraordinary footage, the mother tries to help and is pushed away by the youngster. With endless patience, she tries again. No, not that huge thing. Here, this one is better. Only humans are supposed actively to teach, but textbooks can be rewritten if necessary. Young chimps get enormous pleasure from termite fishing. A hunger to learn and satisfaction with success is also part of our biology. It must drive a lot of what we do.
All right, that's enough to just kind of give you the idea. But if you look up chimp tool use or even just primate tool use, because orangutans are known to create things and use tools too, as well as capuchin monkeys use rocks as tools to break nuts open. There's a world out there that you won't realize that primates are this incredibly smart and that they'll teach one another. They'll even teach other adults how to do these things that haven't been exposed to it. Like it's really cool. So, we have briefly, I mean, not so briefly, but we definitely talked about homologous versus analogous traits in the previous lecture, where I cover the living primates at the second half of it. And I want to come back and bring that more specifically to the field of primatology itself. We share many homologous traits with non-human primates. And if you watch that other lecture, which you should have, if you haven't, but you should test yourself on what does homologous mean. Don't worry, I'll tell you. Homologous means that is something that is inherited from a shared or common ancestor. A great example of this and how this doesn't have to be a biological trait, because many of our traits that we have that are behavioral are also things that we inherited because they were beneficial to our survival in the past and still today. So group living is an example of that. Group living in primates is not something that evolved independently in all of these different groups. And that is something that is very distinctive characteristic of primates. We are all fairly highly, not all of us, okay, most of us, a vast majority of primates are highly social. There are those solitary, like nocturnal primates that don't really socialize, but if they're diurnal, if they're awake during the day, highly sociable most of the time. So seeing group living in all of these different primate groups and primate species was not something that evolved all these bunch of different times. It evolved in a common ancestor and it got handed down to these lineages because it benefited survival for us. And here's a great example here of a huge group of primates. Why do you think that living in a group might have been beneficial to our fitness, to our survival, and then our reproductive prowess after that? There are a number of reasons, right? Like it could relate to predation, strength in numbers. We get better defense. It could relate to, a lot of this actually is going to come back to predation. But there are other things, right? Like having friends. So that doesn't, if you think about it, then humans, that doesn't really help you escape predation, but it is beneficial. It makes you feel good inside. And other primates are very similar. Having that grooming aspect is like calming. It's like, okay, I'm not alone by myself. Because if you isolate a primate, they will get depressed. Because we are social. We are primates, and that's why I say we. But living in groups, I will come back to it throughout this lecture, but it is beneficial to our survival for a number of reasons. Most of those do come back to predation avoidance, though. There are some other traits, though, that definitely did evolve independently. There are several traits that did evolve independently in different primate groups, in different primate species. And those would be called not homologous, but analogous. I'm just going to pretend you were right. Analogous. An example here is the use of hot springs, which is known in both humans and Japanese macaques. Japanese macaques are known to use natural hot springs to warm themselves up. But something else you might not know is that this warm water this like soothing experience, think of like a sauna, right? Or a jacuzzi, that this actually helps reduce stress. It lowers cortisol levels in the body and it feels very rejuvenating. So there is, if you go to a jacuzzi or a hot spring and you feel refreshed afterward, there is actually a biological change happening within you that explains why you feel less stressed when you're done. So Japanese macaques have learned this, that they feel better. There are fewer fights after this, and so they will regularly use these hot springs, especially in mountain areas where it's cold, for two reasons: to be warm and to feel less cranky afterward. So if you're a lifelong learner like I am, a great question to ask, like what different things can I learn by studying homologous traits versus analogous traits? So when we study homologous traits, those help us develop hypotheses about human behaviors as adaptations to environments. We and other primates, we shared a common ancestor at some point, and that means that for a long time we were living in similar environments. So we likely do share, and I know this is true, but we share many traits that reflect a similar evolutionary trajectory. So that looking at our homologous traits can help us develop hypotheses about why those things exist. And then we can build models for behaviors for human ancestors, why that thing may have been adaptive for them. Moving then to analogous traits, why study those? Well, those can help us better understand the effects of ecological variables on phenotypes and behavior. What I mean is that now humans live in a bunch of different environments, whereas primates still haven't spread that far. Other primates, non-human primates, haven't spread that far outside of like the localized regions that they live in. So humans have had to become a lot more generalized, while other primate species can still be fairly specialized in certain areas. So what we can do is we can look at the links between the environments that we live in and certain traits that we possess or have lost, and then we can make connections between why was that adaptive or maladaptive, meaning not helpful in particular environmental settings. Primates have to ensure that at the end of the day that they are either maintaining, so they are taking in as many calories as they expend, but ideally they're taking in more calories than they expend each day, which allows them to create like a fat reserve. So if something were to happen and they can't get food for a significant amount of time or even just a couple of days, they can mobilize those fat stores as energy. When we're describing how much of a food is around for primates, we tend to use two particular words: abundance and distribution. And both of these things together are going to affect energy expenditure. So if something is not abundant, then it's going to take more energy to go find a lot of that thing. And thus that kind of tumbles down, dominoes over into how many calories a primate intakes at the end of the day. So abundance and distribution determine how far animals have to go to find food. Is there, like for leaves, I don't have to go very far because they're pretty much everywhere in a forest. But if I'm looking for fruit, I might have to go further and further because the trees are spread apart. Also, how much competition is there for that food? Are a bunch of primates eating the same thing I am? So I have to compete with that. If we're all competing for the fruit, then it's going to be who gets there first. And I might get to the tree, but then there's no fruit. So that's going to require me to expend additional caloric energy. So energy from the body is in form of calories here. So to give you concrete definitions here, abundance is how much food is available in a given area. And normally the area that we use for reference is a home range. So how far primates in a group typically can go out comfortably and come back. We see them regularly go, this distance and come back. That means our other word here is distribution, and distribution refers to how your food is spread out. And not to worry, I'm going to give you some examples of this. Abundance, got two categories here, very straightforward. Number one, food is either abundant or it's scarce. We tend to not put a middle category there. There's either enough of it to make it fairly easy to find, or it's relatively scarce, meaning there's some work that has to be involved for us to find. So you're either, to illustrate this on the screen, I've got two boxes with orange dots in them. One box has a bunch of orange dots, and the one box has a few orange dots. That is the difference between abundance and scarcity. Second category, distribution. We've got three different types, three different categories of distribution. We've got food can either be uniform, food can be uniform, clumped, or randomly dispersed. Those are the three patterns that we're looking for. High quality foods, which are going to be more like fruit and insects, those tend to be low in abundance, so relatively scarce, and have patchier distributions than lower quality food like leaves. Leaves are relatively widely dispersed, and they're very abundant. So here are some examples of how these dietary patterns match different types of food abundance and distribution out in the world. Fruit tends to come about in clumped patterns. Think about how it exists on particular trees or, I guess, bushes in the case of blackberries or other berries. So trees and bushes, it tends to be clumped at those locations. That would be clumped distribution pattern. Insects tend to be randomly distributed between different areas. Maybe they're going to be down by the river. Maybe like we've got mosquitoes. I don't know who's eating mosquitoes, but just for example, maybe they're all clumped by the river, but the insects themselves are going to be randomly distributed even along that river path. That's what I'm talking about. So insects tend to be very, very random distribution. Leaves, like we saw it with the gorilla, those are typically distributed uniformly. Now, could there be a forest fire and trees are, not around anymore and there's not a ton of leaves? Sure, absolutely that can happen. Deforestation, that can happen. But when we're talking about in the wild where humans are of limited impact, leaves do tend to be distributed uniformly. What this means for primates and their home range and their caloric intake is that primates who eat fruit and insects as a majority of their diet tend to have to travel further to find food, which means that they are burning more calories when they're trying to feed themselves. Large primates, like the gorilla, cannot afford to do this energetically, to lug that big body just as far as these smaller, like insectivores, are going. So the larger body animals, they have to rely on this abundant, uniformly dispersed food like leaves. This is why switching one's diet or seeing primates like the gorilla supplement heavily with fruit or insects is just not something that often happens. It explains the behavior patterns because you might be like, well, why don't gorillas eat these? I see them eat it and eat fruit in captivity. Why are they not eating it out in the wild? And it has to do with how far they have to go to find it and how big their bodies are and what that means energetically. Now, primates don't live alone in their habitats. You probably knew that, but hadn't thought about it a lot. They live with other animals. They live in an ecological habitat that has things like shared air, shared water, shared food sources. Primates are not the only ones eating insects and fruit. There are other animals that eat that too. So there are going to be interactions, cross-species interactions here. What we would refer to this as a field of study is called community ecology, and that field of study is concerned with the relationships and interactions between different organisms, but in the same habitat. So how do those different things interact with one another? Maybe there is a snake that has got really aggressive and starts attacking all these primates. Maybe there's a quadrumundi, which is a weird looking animal, look it up. But maybe it's beating all the primates to the fruit. How does that affect the carrying capacity, the amount of that animal that an environment can support? So community ecology, understanding these different interactions on different levels, very important. The types of interactions that are described in these ecological communities are things that fall into two broad categories. Interactions with conspecifics, so members of the same species. I don't know why this works for me, but I remember, like, if you speak Spanish, the word con, like with, that's at the front. So I think about, oh, I'm with my friends, like of the same species. So conspecifics, I just think con, with, I'm with my friends. And hetero, we know that prefix means different. So heterospecifics means member interactions with members of a different species. So heterospecifics are not your species, but you're interacting either in a friendly way or a not friendly way. And we'll get to how we differentiate those in primates in a second. Humans can also be part of this ecological community interaction, and oftentimes that's not for the best, though. Some habitats out in the wild do support tons of different primates in a single area. And it is worth wondering, like, how can so many different primate species occupy the same area at the same time? Because you might find in like a 5 kilometer area that there are over 10 different primate species. So that doesn't even count the other animals and species and organisms that are around either. The answer to this question is that typically the animals that are all, if you've got, 50 different kinds of animals in the same place, they are not all meeting their needs in the same way. This is called niche differentiation, where different animals eat different kinds of food and they take shelter in different areas. So maybe one particular or a couple types of primate live primarily in the tree canopies. Maybe a couple different types of primate or animal live inside of the trees, like they create go in the holes or the notches of the trees and they live inside the trunk. And then there'll be animals that live down at the base of the canopy. There are animals that live underground. So do you see how there's multiple levels and there are different food resources in each one of those? So if you think of it kind of like when we talked about strata, the layers of the earth, if you think about an environment kind of like that, you can see how if you've got, 10, 20, 50 different species, they can all fill different parts of that and not have to compete so much with one another. They can, and one key thing to note here is that any species on the planet pretty much doesn't want to compete with another species. They don't want to. It is energetically expensive. Oftentimes, the cons outweigh the pros. So, most species prefer to avoid competition if they can. And niche differentiation is one way they can do that. They can eat different kinds of food, they can live in different levels of a forest, and they can go out at different times of day. I can go out at night or I can go out during the day. Depends on my anatomy, right? Can I see at night or not? If I can't see at night, I probably won't be going out at night. But there are many different ways they can structure their activity, so they're not actively competing with another species or even any other of their, relatives. So, emphasizing here at the top of the screen, most species do not want to compete with one another. But when a resource is important to survival, and it is also scarce, individuals absolutely will compete with it. This is the central tenet, sorry, not compete with it, compete for it. This is the central tenet of natural selection, that resources that are necessary to survival will be competed over. That is the past tense of that, right? There will be competition involving that thing, and the ones that are able to compete more successfully will monopolize that thing, and then the ones that were outcompeted, they might die off. And so the traits that were helpful to competition, to winning that competition, will be passed on, and the traits that didn't help those animals compete successfully, they will not be passed on. Competition in primates specifically takes two forms. One, direct competition. This involves physical interaction, so things like fighting, trying to grab it from one another actively out of their hands. And the main source of this is typically going to be fruit, is the thing that primates are going to directly compete over. But direct competition involves physical interaction. I am touching you. I am in your face. Then the other kind is indirect competition, which does not involve any physical interaction. How do you think that works? How do you think you compete for a resource without actually having to interact with another animal, individual? This can occur by just beating other individuals to the food source. So on the screen, I've got an image. It's kind of like a triangular diagram. It's got the cat population on the left side, a dog population on the right side, and one shared food resource. So think about this as like stray cats and dogs out on the streets. Now, whichever one can find the food that kind people like me put out, and actually, when I put out food outside, I'm hoping it's going to be raccoon. It's like my husband's dream to domesticate a raccoon. But when we put food outside, the animal that gets to it first is going to outcompete the other animal. And this could be by chance, or this could be because they learn human routines and they learn when to check the bowl. So it's not just chance all the time. It can be chance for sure. But if you are smart enough to pick up on patterns and routines when this particular plant becomes ripe with fruit, when people put out food on their doorsteps, when the trash truck comes and you can eat the whatever's left behind, then you can outcompete the other species without even having to fight them. Going on with a couple of our discussion of like what do these interactions look like in a community ecology perspective. Some of these interactions are what are called mutualistic interactions. This is when organisms of different species work together and they each get a benefit from that relationship. A wonderful example that I like because it connects back to our discussion of why primates want to eat fruit and why fruit is not hard to digest because fruit wants to be eaten. It's the seed dispersal mechanism of the plant or the tree or what have you, the living thing. Now, seed dispersal is also an example of a mutualistic interaction. The seeds are ingested by the primate. The primate gets first delicious tasting fruit. He's eating a watermelon on the screen, and that is actually my favorite food in the whole world. Yes, my favorite food in the whole world is a fruit, and it's watermelon. Don't judge me. So the primate is eating the fruit, so he's getting delicious snack, and he's also getting the caloric energy, and fruit tends to have a lot of sugar. So he's getting energy and calories from that thing. So pros for the primate. What are the pros for the plant? The plant gets its seeds to go through a digestive tract. When they come out, they will be excreted with poop, which ends up to be as working as kind of like a fertilizer for those seeds. But also, when the primate excretes said seeds, they are probably not in the same location that that plant exists at. So the watermelon vine or whatever, right? He's probably not going back to the watermelon vine to poop because you don't poop where you eat or where you drink. You'll learn that really, really quick as an animal because that is a great way to get sick. So primate leaves, poops elsewhere, and so the plant gets its seeds dispersed. Why is that helpful? So that it can pollinate, cross-pollinate, or interbreed with other plants that have a different kind of genetic makeup. There's a different gene pool out there, which increases genetic diversity, which if you learn anything from this class, please learn genetic diversity is good. So the plant gets higher genetic diversity and dispersal to a different area and fertilization of its seeds. So I don't know, sometimes I think the plant is getting the better end of this deal. So I'm just emphasizing that on the screen with a couple of bullet points just in case you want to see it in writing, but I just explained this to you. Another example, a different kind of mutualistic interaction doesn't have to be between primate and plant. It could also be between different species of primates. These would be called polyspecific interactions. And polyspecific interactions are interactions between two or more different species that are maintained by behavioral changes in at least one of those species. So something that they wouldn't typically do, they are doing because they're going to get a benefit from it. These associations could be temporary. There might be a temporary biological difference or change, not biological difference, a change in behavior, or they can be long-term because they prove to be that beneficial. This may involve alerting species to predators in the area that they're in that they would not have been aware of in return for access to some food resource or in return for the same thing. So we could have two different species where one is really good about spotting land predators and one's really good at spotting air predators. Like meerkats are great watchers if you ever go to the zoo. They always have got someone on watch. If you combine those two, then you are more likely as a group, even though you're not the same species, to survive and not be eaten. So that if you are change your call, your alarm call of a predator to be more understandable to the other species, that's a change. That's something you wouldn't do if you were an isolated species. But because you're getting a benefit that the other primate species is going to let you know when there's a predator too, you do it. Chimpanzees and gorillas are also known to form and maintain these long-term social ties and even play with one another. They are often formed at the beginning when they're very little and then maintained over time. But this just could be useful to increase the size of the group, which again, strengthen numbers, right? Now, I've mentioned several times that primates are highly social. That is very true. Most of them live in groups, even outside of the breeding season. This is pretty unique when compared to the behaviors of other animals. The breeding season itself is when females are receptive to mating. They are not receptive all of the time, just like human females cannot get pregnant 365 days out of the year. There are certain times when you are fertile, and there are certain times when you are closed for business. For most female primates, this is when they are not nursing or pregnant. They are fertile, but we've got ovulation cycles too, so there's variation in there as well. Sociality, which is the tendency to form these social groups, is a very key behavioral adaptation, meaning it helps us live and survive in the order primates. Primatologists ask questions like, why do primates live in groups? What are the pros? What are the cons? What do those lists look like? And what types of groups do primates tend to live in? Is there variation in the group type? And yes, there is. So let's start with the first question. Why do primates live in groups? Primates only live in groups when the benefits outweigh the costs. If the costs are more than benefits, there's no reason to live in a group. There are many potential benefits, but the one that I've kept hammering home here is predation avoidance. Another one is enhanced competition for food. If you're a group of 50 primates and you're trying to secure a fruit tree, and there's a group of 20 primates and you're about the same size, the group of 50 is going to outcompete. So having larger groups can be beneficial to securing resources, like vervet monkeys in Kenya. Larger groups had, when you look at primatology studies of this, larger groups of vervet monkeys had a bigger and better home range, meaning that the territory that they were able to defend and use for resources, than groups that were smaller in number. Females in bigger groups also see a reproductive benefit. They had higher average infant survival rates, meaning of the babies that they had, of the pregnancies and babies that they gave birth to, that more of those babies survived than in small groups. Why do you think that is? Well, it might seem paradoxical here because pregnancy and nursing are energetically expensive. Like one of the most energetically expensive things that a human body can do is carry a baby and then feed it, breastfeed it afterward. So female reproductive success is normally limited by access to food. The amount of babies that you can carry to be viable, to give birth to be a live birth, and then to breastfeed afterward is limited by the amount of calories you can put into your body. If you cannot put a lot of calories into your body while you're breastfeeding, your ovulation stops. This is true in humans as well. If you are nutritionally deprived and you are breastfeeding, your ovulation stops and you cannot get pregnant because your body says, I cannot handle another one right now. We are in dire straits. Do not stress me like this. Same thing for primates. But, and if you live in a bigger group, you might have to compete with other members of the same group for food. So this might seem paradoxical for moms, like why live in a big group? Now you're already stressed for calories, you're gonna have to compete with other members of your group. But it seems like when it, from the infant perspective, from the Darwinian fitness perspective, that the benefits here of predation avoidance, so not having their babies get eaten, and they do this shared care of infants, this alloparenting. There are different females that help rear other young. They all kind of chip in. The shared care of that infant greatly contributes to the infant survival, so evolution has favored this. The con of living in a group is that big groups are more likely to attract attention from predators. This is one of the reasons why primates who rely on crypsis are often solitary and nocturnal. Crypsis is a type of predation avoidance that is about being quiet and stealthy and never having them know that you were there in the first place. So if an animal is hard to see because it's active at night, it moves quietly in tiny groups or by itself. This is a pretty good strategy to avoid predators. You just go right under their noses, or you walk around when they're sleeping, but you have to be quiet so you don't wake them up. An example of this, a small solitary creature that uses crypsis, is the slow loris.
A ghostly apparition appears in the branches. One of the most primitive primates in the world. The slender loris, named for its very slender limbs. Once Sri Lanka would have been filled with these strange little creatures. As forest habitat shrinks, so too does its presence. Tonight, this male loris uses his excellent night vision to seek out the ripest fruits. He uses his spindly limbs to maneuver through spindly branches.
Okay, so the words there, not super important, but you can see he's moving very slowly. He's not making a lot of noise. He's by himself. He has great night vision. So he's able to eat his food while the predators are sleeping because most predators are awake during the day, not the nighttime. So crypsis is what non-group living primates use to avoid predation. Primates who live in groups and are diurnal, awake during the day, can't use these crypsis techniques. They are in groups. They're not going to be quiet. They're going to make noise. So they rely on other behaviors that alert others to the presence of danger and also deter predators. One of these tactics is called vigilance. Vigilance is watchful behavior to detect potential danger. And this is normally tied to alarm calling. Alarm calling are vocalizations used by primates in response to danger. And some primates have different kinds of calls to alert to a predator coming from the sky versus a predator coming from the land so that other primates know immediately where to look. So like a bird predator versus a snake predator. They would have a different call, and all the other primates of at least of their species, sometimes different species again can understand the calls of other species, but they hear it and they're like, oh shoot, I've got to look up or I've got to look down, and that helps. Here's an example of an alarm call.
These monkeys have different alarm calls for different. That's the leopard alarm call of the Diana monkey. And that totally different one is the spot nose. But the important point is that all species of monkey in the alliance recognize one another's call and know the nature of the enemy.
So we've got a leopard call there. Now, some species, on top of having vigilance and alarm calling, they might use a technique called mobbing. You wouldn't really see this so much in smaller animals, but in bigger animals, this is when they cooperatively attack or harass a predator. If there's one predator and 30 baboons, the baboons can take that predator by all mobbing it together and hurting it to the point till it retreats. So that is more of a physical act. The other ones are more of a let's get out of here kind of act. Now we can move to the second question, which is what types of groups do primates live in? There are some components of primate social systems that we need to address first. Number one, a component of a social system is the group size. This just is the number of individuals that typically live together in the group. This varies a lot in primates. It can range from a group of 1 to 100 plus individuals, which if I came across 100 plus of any primate, I would be freaking out a little bit. Another component is group composition. This describes who is in the group. Some groups are just a mom and an offspring, dependent offspring. Most of the time when primates are done breastfeeding, especially in like smaller animals, they kind of are on their own. Other groups are male, female, plus offspring. An example of that might be owl monkeys. And some groups have one male, multiple females, and their offspring. This is very different, and we're going to go through some of the instances and examples of like how this might happen or what groups this might happen in. Another component of a social group is a mating system. How do individuals choose to mate? There are many different terms that we need to cover, and I will cover them as we go through each of the social groups. But I'm going to give you an example of one now, and you might be familiar with monogamy. Monogamy tends to be a one-to-one relationship. But another example you might not have heard of is polygyny. That prefix poly we know means many, right? That suffix, gyny, Gyny. What doctor can you think of has gyn in it, Gyn, gynecologist, right? So that means female. What this word means is many females. This means that this mating system, polygyny, is one male mating with multiple different females. Again, I try to definitely hammer home those prefixes and word roots. Mostly they trace back to Latin, but so that you can parse these words out if you forget. It's not about memorizing the word itself, it's about realizing patterns. You didn't have to know that Gyn, that meant female. You could have just thought about other words that also have that in them, like gynecology, and you could figure it out from patterns. That's learning, not memorizing. Another component of primate social systems are ranging behaviors, which is about how animals move around in their environment. Most species have a home range, which is what they do their daily activities in, and then some defend a bigger territory than their home range because they're trying to monopolize resources they may not be using all the time, but that they do rely upon. If you've seen Sister Wives, the show Sister Wives on TLC, I don't know if it's still running, but that is an example of polygyny. I forgot I have this picture on the screen. I should have mentioned it when I was talking about polygyny. We will come back, don't fear. We will come back to the other ones on the screen, polygamy, polyandry, monogamy. We will come back to those. Another component of primate social systems are dispersal patterns. In primates, it would be unusual for the group to be a singular family group. What happens is that typically one sex will leave the group when it's time for them to go find mating partners. In most primate groups, males are the ones who disperse. They leave what is called their natal group. Their natal group is the group they were born into. They leave to go out and find breeding partners elsewhere. Try and take a guess as to why this is, because there is a reason that this makes sense. There are benefits and there are costs, sure, right? Because cost is a benefit. Let's start with benefit. Benefit is that you're going to have access to mates that you're not related to, and you might have access to mates with less competition. So if you're moving from a big group to a small group, you can get less competition. There will still be some, but less. There is a cost, is that when you move to that new group, there's probably going to be aggression. The males that already exist in that group, they're going to be like, no, we don't want you. We don't want extra competition. So you may end up at the bottom of the hierarchy, which means you get fewer opportunities to mate. Now, so that might be hard to understand the perspective, but keep in your mind genetic diversity at all points here. Somebody has to leave the group for genetic diversities for us to avoid inbreeding and to get mutations and maladaptations happening, right? So somebody's got to leave. For males, maybe we're not getting the strong, okay, this makes sense. Now let's look at it from the female perspective. Females tend to be philopatric. Philopatric means they stay with the group they were born into, their natal group. The costs and benefits are way clearer here. Cost is not really anything, but if the other sex is leaving, then I guess you're losing a brother, but there's not really any alliance in that way. But females can maintain strong alliances with females that they are already related to, which means they can cooperate not only in competing for food, but also in in raising offspring cooperatively. Because if you are related, like if you've got your sisters and your nieces, or not your nieces, well, I guess your nieces, your aunts, your aunties, your moms, your grandmas, and you're all related. If you help rear one another's offspring, you're making sure at least some of your DNA too, because you're related, you share DNA with those individuals, that some of your DNA is getting passed down along as well. So it is benefiting the success of every related member of that group. Now, in solitary species, both of the sexes disperse because there's not really like a natal group that stays together because they're solitary. So males and females, if they're brother and sister, they both go their separate ways when they are old enough to do so. Another component of primate social systems are the social interactions that happen within them. These can be nice or these can be mean. You know, if you've got siblings, then you know that you've run the full gamut. You're not always nice to them. Affiliative behaviors are the scientific way of saying friendly or non-aggressive behaviors. Things like grooming, playing, or coalitions, which are temporary alliances, are all I'm being nice to you behaviors or affiliative behaviors. Agonistic behaviors are those that are aggressive, like agony, like you see the relationship there. It makes me feel aggressive. Those are the types of interactions, so fighting over food or competing over access to mates. Both of those are types of agonistic behaviors. In groups that we have multiple adults of the same sex. So imagine a group of primates and there are a bunch of males, let's say 50 males and 20 females. Most of the time, we see a dominance hierarchy form. Dominance hierarchies are rankings. Like there's obviously no board or something like that. It's not like Abby Lee Miller. You're at the top of the pyramid and you're at the bottom on a physical thing. They all just kind of know their role. So the dominance hierarchy is your relative power or prestige within your group, how much power, your dominance you have over others. But that dominance is gained through conflict. So if you want to move up, you've got to challenge the people above you enough to prove your dominance over them and move up the hierarchy. You do get a benefit being higher up in the hierarchy because you get better access to resources and mates. And mates can be considered a resource, I guess. Subordinates, they get not the pick of the litter. They got to wait their turn. So it goes through the hierarchy. Dominance hierarchies result in there's a difference between less and fewer. There are fewer agonistic encounters in groups that have dominance hierarchies. Why? Because if you know you're at the base of the hierarchy and you know who the dominant guy is at the top, you are less likely, there are just fewer instances of challenging because you've had your booty kicked too many times. You're like, it's not worth it. Maybe I can go from here to here, but that guy's way bigger than me. There's no way I'm going here to here. So because all the individuals in the dominance hierarchy kind of know their place, it reduces the frequency of these aggressive encounters, which is beneficial, right? I told you, primates don't want to compete. No species wants to actively compete if it doesn't have to, if it's not necessary to reproduction or survival. All right, so now we are going to move through different kinds of primate groups, and we're going to talk about how they mate, what those groups look like, what are the words. We're going to walk through all of that. I believe there are 6. Starting with our first group, which are solitary individuals. On the screen, you're going to see the same type of picture for each of these social groups. The blue ones are going to represent males. The red ones are going to represent females. And the dashed lines represent kind of like their territories, their overlap. They're like home ranges, basically. So with solitary, we've got 4 primates on the screen. 2 are blue, 2 are red. One blue guy's got his own territory with nobody in it. One red one's got the territory with nobody in it. And then another red guy, the other female, has a territory except this other blue individual, the other male, he overlaps with that female's home range. That's going to be important here in a second. So the word solitary describes species in which individuals do not live or travel together typically, unless it's a mom with an unweaned offspring, in which that means offspring is, baby is breastfeeding, so it needs to be with mom for survival. Males have bigger home ranges on average than females, and the intent here is that they overlap with a female at some point. When they come into contact with that female, hopefully she is ready, she is fertile, because that is when they tend to mate. So our mating system here is one male who, because he has such a big home range, overlaps with multiple females over time. He's trying to make a big home range circle to try to increase his reproductive success by overlapping with multiple females. So I've got one male mating with multiple females. What is this called? Here's the mating system. So yeah, when I put these black background pictures, this is the mating system. And here, again, blue and red. Blue means male, red means female. We've got one blue guy who is, he is working his way to overlap with all of these three different females. And these other blue guys are on the outskirts. Their home ranges don't allow them to overlap with these females. So our mating system, one male, multiple females, that's polygyny. We just went through that. Poly meaning many, gyny meaning females, many females. Male is mating with many females. Males have to compete with other males for access. So this blue guy here in the center of this mating system who's overlapping with these three females here, he is living life large. He's having high reproductive success. These guys on the outside who are defending less desirable territory or smaller territorial ranges, they want to be him. They want to take his spot in that overlapping of the three female home ranges. So to do that, they got to compete with him. Now, in males, the bigger you are, the better you are at competing, or the bigger your canines or whatever, right? So these males tend to exhibit, or in these species that are solitary, we tend to see some sexual dimorphism, where males are oftentimes larger or have bigger canines than females. That is sexual dimorphism, a difference in the morphology, the biology, the like overall shape, body, something like that, traits between males and females. In these instances, I already mentioned it, but just to reiterate, males and females both disperse from the natal group and they live solitary. Moving to number 2, single male, single female groups. Group sizes here, 2 to 5, relatively small. Adults engage in behaviors that strengthen pair bonding, things like grooming one another and napping together. Having that touch, having that person, having the other individual next to you is calming. It's like reduces your mental stress because we're in it together. You know, a predator's not going to come on and get all of us because we have each other. They work together to defend a territory and keep individuals away from their mate. On the images on the screen. All right, social system. We've got a group of 6 here, so that goes a little bit beyond my range that I have on the screen, but that's just for illustrative purposes. And these groups are by no means extensive. That doesn't mean that they can't be group of 7. That doesn't mean that. It means they often are between 2 and 5 in number. So we've got 3 males and 3 females. And each of the males is paired with a female securing a home range together. If you and a male or a female, whatever your preference is here, if you are defending a home range together, makes sense that you mate with one another. So these individuals in a single male, single female system, so they are not the only ones in the group, right? They could be a group of 2, but the group could be bigger, so it could be a couple of these pairs. This type of mating is largely monogamous, but mating outside of these monogamous partnerships is known to occur. Sneaky links are known to occur. And that's not our place to judge, right? So species that are monogamous are normally sexually monomorphic. So sexual dimorphism, that prefix di means there's 2 different morphic forms, morphologies, really. And species that are monogamous are monomorphic, meaning one form. So males and females are of the general same size, whether that be weight or height. So if you're looking up a primate and you see that the males and the females are basically the same size, you know that there's not a lot of competition for mating happening. So this is the same group. Notice I haven't changed groups here. Okay, we're still in the single male, single female group. So monogamy, let's not talk about the sneaky links right now. The monogamy, it makes it so that males are fairly certain about the paternity of that offspring. They're sure that their mate is just with them. And so because they're fairly darn sure that baby is theirs from their mate, that baby belongs to them, they invest a lot of care into their infant. And that is not something that we tend to see from males in other primate groups. So monogamy increases the likelihood that males are going to invest in their offspring, and you can probably see that in humans as well. So something males might do are carry it when it is not nursing. So they're gonna expend the caloric, cost of lugging some extra weight around. Why are paternity certainty and parental investment related? You don't want to invest time and energy from a primate perspective into a child that isn't yours. And I just like to point out that the only dad that I have is a stepdad. So I'm not saying that for humans. My dad has obviously invested a lot of time, money, and energy into a child that is not biologically his. I'm meaning from an evolutionary perspective for these species that don't have the same levels of cognitive processes that we do. If you are a male, you don't want to be wasting calories and energy and time into an offspring that when you could be having other offspring that are actually yours. At maturity for these individuals, males and females both disperse from their natal group, just like what we have in solitary creatures. An example of a primate that lives in this type of social system is the Bolivian gray titi monkey. They have a signature move, signature pair bonding behavior that I love that is called tail twining. And this is especially common between a mating pair, the individuals in a mating pair, but it can also occur with their offspring. It's kind of like holding hands, but with tails, and it reinforces just social bonds between family members. Okay, moving to our third social group, single male, multi-female group. Single male, multi-female group. We've got one adult male, multiple adult females, and then the female's dependent offspring. These groups are a bit bigger. They range from 5 to 50 individuals. Because there are so many females in this group, female social relationships are structured by dominance hierarchies. This is something we'll see in males too, but in this group, females are dominance hierarchy structured. Females are typically philopatric, which means they remain with the group they were born into, and males take off to go find a mate. Males are dispersing. Males who can't find a group of females to join to be like the resident male is what is called the male of the group that is breeding with all these females. If you think about the demographics here, right? Like not every male is going to be able to get their own group of females. It used to be called a harem. We don't use that term anymore, but you may hear it somewhere else. Because that's a cultural term used in a particular human cultural group and has some connotations that we don't try to cross pollinate into primatology. But so males can't always find a group for them to be their group of females. So what they'll do is they'll form a temporary group, an all-male temporary group that is called a bachelor group. These tend to be the younger males because as males get older, they often secure these resident male positions, the higher up positions. All right, mating system. We've got one male mating with multiple females. That mating system is what? One male mating with multiple females. Did you say polygyny? I hope you did, because it's polygyny again. So far we've done polygyny and monogamy. Don't worry, the other ones will be coming too. So the resident male of the group, the one that's monopolizing all these breeding females, he doesn't want other males in the group, right? He wants to maximize his reproductive success, which means if somebody comes in and tries to take his position as resident male, he's like, what? And they've got to fight. So he worries about being replaced because then his fitness is going to go down the drain. But these guys on the outside of the mating system, they are looking at the resident male saying, I want your job, dude. I want to have some offspring with these ladies too. So competition is intense between these males on the outside and the male on the inside, the resident male. He's got to defend his position. If competition is so intense, would we expect these primates to have sexual dimorphism or sexual monomorphism? Do we expect males and females to be around the same size, or do we expect males and females to be different sizes? We expect them to be, sorry, I hit the button too soon. We expect them to be different sizes. We expect them to be dimorphic. Males are probably going to be bigger because they've got to compete with other males, and being bigger helps. Now, in these groups, there is also something that is not so uncommon, but that sounds like a horrible thing in humans. And this is something called infanticide. I'll give you a group that does this, who is known to do this. This is Hahnemann Langers. They are on the screen. They are scruffy little looking guys with very dark faces and hands. When a new male comes in, so he ousts the resident male. He comes in, he's the new resident male. he can commit infanticide, which means killing off all of the unweaned infants, the infants that are still breastfeeding. This is especially common if the new male hasn't had the chance to mate with any of those females yet, and he knows, this is more here, you're not the father. He's not the father of any of those. Why? Why would he kill off all those infants? I've already kind of given you some clues before. Well, one, he knows they're not his, so he's not killing off his kids. Number two, if a female is breastfeeding, primates, and again, sometimes in humans, but in most primates out in the wild who live on the cusp of starvation every day, females cannot reproduce when they're breastfeeding well, obviously when they're pregnant, but when they're breastfeeding. It's too energetically expensive. They cannot reproduce. Their ovulation is suppressed. So if he kills off all those unweaned infants, mom's no longer breastfeeding. Her body says, "Oh, I've got all these extra calories I was using before." And then her body says, "All right, we can sustain a pregnancy now." And she goes back into ovulation. So the new resident male can now start impregnating these females and increasing his reproductive success. So, infanticide, I know it sounds horrible, and obviously in humans we wouldn't do that. But I mean, we don't endorse that. That's immoral. But in primates, if you put on the evolutionary perspective hat, it does make sense. So doing this causes nursing females to become receptive to breeding and able to carry a pregnancy sooner, so the new male can increase his fitness. All right, moving now to our fourth social composition system. This is multi-male, multi-female, multiple adult males, females, and weaned offspring. This is what we've got. We definitely have more adult females than males on average, typically. These groups get even bigger, 10 to 500 individuals. Since there are so many females in this group, it is not possible for any single male to monopolize every breeding female and to be the only one mating. So we kind of have everybody mating with everybody else. It's a little bit of a free-for-all. We got many males mating with many females. This gives us the mating system of polygamy. So poly at the beginning still meaning many, and then I don't really know what gummy means, but like many individuals mating with many individuals. This does not mean that all males have the same amount of mating opportunities. It means that both sexes have dominance hierarchies that the male one, it determines how often they get to mate. What are their access to mating groups, breeding females? And the female resource dominance hierarchy is about their access to food. Like, do they get pre-male access to food, or they just got to wait for what's left over? So both of those hierarchies relate to access to some sort of resource. For males, it's mates, and for females, it's food. Their place in their hierarchies, their respective hierarchies, 100% affects their reproductive success. This means that there is a strong amount of competition happening, which leads to sexual dimorphism being apparent in these types of groups. However, it is rare that a male would be excluded from mating like altogether. He probably could secure some mates, but just fewer than other males. So the level of competition is not extreme. It's moderate. There's more than you would see in a sexually monomorphic species, but it's not what you would see in a fierce competition where there's only one residence male and these other ones are looking to oust him. So the sexual dimorphism is moderate, not extreme, but not non-existent. Now, usually females are philopatric and males disperse. This is pretty similar. This is similar to what we've seen in all of the other groups. Vervet monkeys, great example of this type of group. Moving now to number 5, this is fission fusion. Fission fusion. This is a very fluid social system in which size and composition of the group changes over time. Groups fission or split and merge or fuse together depending on food availability. So if resources are scarce, individuals spread out and feed as individuals are like smaller subgroups, so they're not actively competing with members of their own group. When they're plentiful, individuals will travel and feed as a large cohesive group because there's no need to kind of ration things. Fission fusion structure is believed to reduce competition for food in times of scarcity. The group prefers to stay together, but when they split apart, it seems to be under times of duress. Group sizes are not huge here, 10 to a few dozen individuals, and chimpanzees are pretty much the hallmark group of a fission fusion system. Now, this kind of deviates from our pattern. In a fission fusion system, females are the ones that often disperse and males are philopatric. This is unique to the pattern we've been setting so far. So males are related. So males left behind are related. This is typically what we see in the females when females stay behind with their natal group. Males are related and they show some unusual forms of cooperation that we wouldn't see in other groups where the males are unrelated. So there are some consequences, some behavioral changes that are attached to the fact that females disperse and males stay. The mating systems that we've covered so far are monogamy, polygyny, and polygamy. Which do you think works best for a fission fusion group? Is polygamy. We've got multiple males and multiple females that are mating together, so that is polygamy. Males are definitely not excluded from mating. Competition isn't super high, so sexual dimorphism is moderate. Moving to our final social structure here. This is multi-male, single female. Multi-male, single female. We've got 2+ males with 1 breeding female, her unweaned offspring, and get this, because it's not just 1 female in here, there are non-breeding females too. So the name of the group, multi-male, single female, that refers to who's breeding in the group. There are other females present. They're just not breeding. This system is common to marmosets and tamarins, who are very small creatures. Some of them have these beautiful handlebar mustaches. Some of them are beautiful, like tiger mane, has like bright red hair. These groups are fairly small, don't tend to exceed 15 individuals, but they will defend their territory quite fiercely and very loudly. The mating system here is we've got 1 female mating with multiple males. This is a new one. We haven't addressed this yet. This is, okay, so there's still multiple partners, so we still got that poly at the front, but this time instead of being multiple breeding females, it's multiple breeding males. So we need to change, instead of gyne, we need something else, and that's andry, polyandry. Think of the word like androgen. That's like a male hormone. So androgen. So polyandry means that 1 breeding female mates with multiple males. Now, this 1 breeding female, you might be like, why? Why is there only 1 breeding female when there are other females in the circle, in the group? This is because the breeding female basically is dominant enough that it causes the other females to have reproductive suppression. So either through behavioral means or through psychological intimidation means, they don't have opportunities to mate. So it limits the ability for other females to become pregnant. What do they do instead? Because if you're a good student, you should be thinking, okay, well, why does evolution favor that? Like, why would some females not be breeding? That doesn't make sense. And all of these other females have low fitness. Yes, exactly. That's the problem. So they must be doing something. What they do is they help raise the breeding female's offspring. This occurs for a number of reasons. Number one is because these groups do tend to have twins, but the more important one is that the females are often related. So by helping the breeding female rear her offspring, the aunties can make sure that some of their DNA, because that's her sister, some of their DNA that they share with their sister is still getting passed on. So part of their DNA is still going on to the next generation, even though they're not reproducing. This is called cooperative breeding, and it involves things like carrying the infants, grooming them, and protecting them from danger, even though they're not the bio parents. So I just told you why evolution favors this. Females in this group, ooh, very different. We get them slightly bigger than males because they can try to compete for that breeding female spot if they're bigger. So not a huge sexual dimorphism here because females don't tend to kill one another for access to mates, whereas males do. But females do tend to be a little bit bigger than males, which is a unique divergence from the pattern we've seen here. Now, I've talked throughout this about some reproductive strategies that have evolved to maximize an individual's reproductive success. And we can kind of divide these into two big umbrella categories. One, those that deal with offspring production and care. This is called parental investment. And those that maximize mating success, which relate to sexual selection. Males and females have different biologies, therefore, they have different investment and selection strategies. So females focus on a few things. They focus on obtaining food to sustain pregnancy and lactation, and they try to choose the best mate to give their offspring the best genes and best chance of survival. Males focus on pretty much one thing, which is gaining access to receptive females. Males' investment in reproduction is very energetically cheap. Sperm are energetically cheap, and so they are not limited by the amount of food that they can ingest. They don't have to carry pregnancy. They don't have to worry about getting all those excess calories for that. Any time or energy that a parent devotes to the current offspring that they have enhances its survival, and eventually it should help its reproductive success, unless you're me and you choose to be child-free. So I have low reproductive success. Sorry, parents. But the investment that a parent makes is at their expense. The more I invest in this one offspring, the less I can invest in a offspring that's close behind my next offspring, right? Like there is a trade-off. I can't invest 100% of my energy into every single one. I have finite energy and I got to divide it up based on how many offspring I have. So females definitely 100% non-negotiable here. Energetically invest more in offspring than males even before conception. So this is not an active choice that we're making. Even before conception occurs, producing an egg or an ovum is energetically expensive, and we have no choice in that. Sustaining that embryo in the uterus, even more energetically demanding. Then there's lactation, even, I don't know, I think pregnancy is more energetically demanding, but still energetically demanding. Males, they've got limitless sperm. Males can reproduce all the way till they die. Sperm doesn't cost a lot of energy to create, to produce. So this energetic demand is why primates don't often produce more than one offspring at once, and why mom, if she's investing this much before that baby's even out of her, she wants to make darn sure that thing's going to survive, so she just didn't waste all those calories for no reason. But for males, their energetic investment is way lower. They don't really care if that thing survives because they didn't invest the same amount of calories into it as mom did. So we see less investment, less parental care from males. Now, talking about how many offspring primates have, there is a general window of time between offspring, and that's going to range depending on the species. This is called the interbirth interval. That's the typical length of time between one birth and the next. It is determined by the time necessary to maximize each offspring's survival without jeopardizing the female's ability to produce the greatest number of offspring possible. So we are looking to balance. If I invest too much in one offspring and not the other, so I've got two kids, right? And I invest all my time in this one and none in this one, and I'm a primate, this other one that's getting no investment is probably going to die. So I just wasted all the calories I invested producing that one. But if I have 5 offspring or 10 offspring, how am I going to make sure all of them survive? So then we have higher mortality if I have too many. So you've got primates, how many offspring they have at a time, and the interbirth interval are like a balancing act between how do we maximize reproductive success. So things like investing too little and weaning too early before baby's ready to eat full food, like whole foods, that means you can have a lot of births, but low survival. If you invest too much, like waiting too long to wean, you breastfeed them to like 5, then that baby's gonna survive. They got high survival rate, but you have low numbers of offspring. So again, evolution is trying to find this in between, this Goldilocks number. Now, a question I often get from students is like, do primates just, actually, my students often assume that primates know how to rear offspring, that they just are born knowing how to do it. Now, remember, we're primates too. Now, this is a great example of where primatology comes in because primatologists said, that's a good question. I want to know that too. So they studied female primates. Now, some captive female primates, they've never had the opportunity to watch another female rear an offspring, or they've never had an offspring. They don't know. If you allow them to, breed, reproduce, because, a lot of zoos want to make sure that we're contributing to the numbers in the wild. If you take these captive primates that have never they've grown up in captivity and they've never watched child rearing happen in real time, they don't know how to care for offspring. They might refuse to touch it, they might refuse to feed it, they might even try to hurt it, and humans often have to step in. This is why zoo nurseries are necessary. What does this teach us? That maternal behavior, even in non-human primates, is not innate, meaning we're born with it. It's not something that comes to you naturally. You've got to either be taught how to do it, learn how to do it, see somebody how to do it, and mimic it. In humans, so if someone ever tells you that in human, you're a human, I'm a human, if they tell you, oh, it's a female's job to like have babies, that's what you're built for. You can biologically have children, sure. I mean, if your biology allows, sure. Knowing how to take care of them is a whole other thing that is learned. And many of us learn how to rear a child by thinking about what things did my parents do that I didn't like that I'm going to do differently. That's how a lot of us learn. We learn through the trial and error of somebody else raising us and saying, okay, what I like, what I didn't, what did I not like? Primates that are in captivity don't have that opportunity. And same thing for humans. So mothering is not an innate thing that happens. And in humans, we expect more of the fathers because we have more of a social complex situation going on, right? So we expect more, and that's okay because we have higher complex thought. So there is no, you biologically know how to take care of a baby. You don't. That's not something that's programmed in there. You have to learn it. All right, moving now to talking about types of sexual selection. We've talked about competition a lot today. There are two big types of competition when it comes to sexual selection. First one is intra-sexual selection. Intra means within. So this is selection for traits that enhance ability of members of one sex to compete among themselves. Most often, this is happening within males. In the wild, females are either pregnant or lactating a majority of their life. So females are a limiting resource that males must compete for. So this type of selection, intrasexual selection, favors traits that help a male win fights against other males, but for access to females. Things that are on part of intrasexual selection, big canine size, large body size. Those are examples of traits that are products of intrasexual selection, males competing with males. On the other hand, intersexual selection is selection for traits that enhance the ability of one sex to attract the other. This also tends to operate on males, selecting for traits that females find more attractive. They want to choose the male that has these traits. Females choose from an array of traits that strike their fancy, but it benefits females to be choosy and not just mate with whoever, because first they're going to be pregnant for a long time, right? They're not going to have a chance to quickly change their mind. But she wants to pick the healthiest, strongest, biggest competitor male because she's hoping that those traits will pass along to her kid, who will be able to pass those traits along, and that she won't have to waste her energetic investment, that kid's going to be a fighter and he's going to make it. I don't know why I'm saying he, it could be a she, right? What traits do females look for? Well, we talked about this with peacocks and peahens, but in humans, women may look for something like food, paternal care, protection. We might look for ability to provide. So maybe some people are looking for socioeconomic status. It's up to your preference. You might look for people who have the same religious bent as you, right? Like this, it's easier for you to agree on how to raise your child. There are humans look for a lot more things than other primates do. In non-human primates, females are really looking for genetic benefits for their offspring. Health is something that can be perceived by bright coloration. You can't be bright colored if you are sick or malnourished. Large body size and a nice healthy coat, just like beautiful healthy human hair. That means you're giving it the nutrients that it needs. Choosing an older male might mean that her offspring might live longer. She might like that because that increases reproductive success. Again, it doesn't have to, like he could be infertile, that could happen, but for primates, they tend to have a lot more offspring than we do, so living longer could increase his reproductive success. You might choose a high-ranking male, which means that those traits that made him good at winning competitions pass down to your offspring. You might want to mate with someone who's really different than you because then you're getting more diverse genes for your offspring, which means that they might have a better immune system or other traits that aren't in this population that might be beneficial. So sneaking copulations with new immigrants to the group might be beneficial to introduce some diversity there. Now, I want to end by talking about primate communication. This is going to be a pretty fast segment here. Communication in primates is varied and it relies on the five senses. Communication is when an individual or group, let's talk about individual. An individual emits some sort of signal that conveys information that is then received and understood by another individual. It has to be understood or communication isn't happening. Species vary on which sense they rely on the most, and we're going to focus on four senses: vocal, visual, olfactory, and tactile. Vocal communication seems pretty straightforward, right? There is an audible, verbal signal that is then interpreted by other members of that same group or different groups. Howler monkeys are an excellent example of this type of communication. They mark their territory with these loud calls.
These are howler monkeys. Their habitat spans from southern Mexico to northern Argentina. Looking at them, you may find it hard to believe that such small animals can make a sound that's like a combination air raid siren and heavy metal guitar solo. The fact is, howler monkeys are considered to be among the loudest animals on Earth. Well, you be the judge.
When I was in Costa Rica, I actually heard these guys in real life, and it was crazy how loud they were. Now, think about why communicating like this so loud would be beneficial, right? Because then predators know where you are. But the benefit is that in a forest, like you can, in the video, these howler monkeys are in dense foliage, a lot of leaves. It's very hard to communicate via visual means. Like I can't really see the other individuals in my group, but I can hear them. So it's easier to communicate in a verbal way, in a vocal way. And these calls that howler monkeys use, they indicate the number in their group. So the louder that they can be, the more that they can intimidate a rival group and be like, no, they're going to try and pretend that there's like 100 of them. The louder they can be, the more it appears that they are bigger in number and they can outcompete another group for like a territory or resource without actually even directly competing with them. So whoever the quieter group is, they will end up retreating. Now, Diana monkeys and vervet monkeys are also a really great example of vocal communication between different species. They have a series of predator calls. They have aerial and terrestrial calls. They can differentiate between pursuit, like something's behind me, or ambush predators. Oh my gosh, something just jumped out at me. They have learned to quietly avoid chimps who are often hunting these kinds of monkeys. Now, vervets are born with the ability to make predator-specific alarm calls. Vervets can, from birth, they know I make this kind of sound when something comes from the sky, and I make this kind of sound when something comes from the ground. But they haven't learned the nuances of it yet. So vervet babies make the aerial alarm call for anything coming from the sky, even a leaf, they make the predator alarm call. Now, parents, that's not helpful to them, right? It's gonna be like the little chicken who said the sky is falling, the sky is falling. You're like, stop it. That's not helpful. You're putting us on alert, or we're all running away and there's nothing actually to be afraid of. And then when there is, we're not going to be ready for it. So parents have to actively teach the babies how to use these calls appropriately. Campbell's monkeys use like these suffixes almost to the ends of their calls to indicate something about like timing. So like a crack versus a cracku can indicate like it's almost like using past tense. So they can indicate if a call came from another species or if it came from a member of their own species. Because if it came from another species, it might be less reliable, but if it came from their own species, maybe they're more confident. But adding these little suffixes gives additional information about where the call came from. Moving to visual communication, one example of primate visual communication is something called piloerection. This is raising one's hair or one's fur. If you feel like the ends of your hair, like people say, oh, I felt the hairs on my neck stand up, this is a remnant of piloerection from when hominins had a lot of more and thicker body hair. We probably could do something like this too. We can't anymore, so don't try to intimidate somebody this way. Piloerection is used in aggressive interactions to make an individual appear bigger in body size than they actually are. So it's an intimidation tactic. Another type of visual communication in females not is not something they can control. It is the size and color of their sexual swelling. On many female groups, they have a swelling that gets really red or pink in color when they are in their peak receptivity for impregnation. It reaches its maximum size at ovulation, and pregnant or nursing females, they will not have a swelling at all. So males see that red swelling and they say, okay, that's a fertile female. I'm going to go try to mate with her. Humans don't have this, thank goodness. We have what is called hidden ovulation. So there is nothing that outside of the body that is an immediate indicator that a female is ovulating, which should make you think about what our natural breeding pattern is, because there's a lot of debate. So maybe think about that. Other things that primates can use to visually communicate are their facial expressions. So showing your teeth in a smile like we do is actually not normal. We use it for friendship or like, hey buddy, what's up? We use it like as a friendly thing. In non-human primates, showing your teeth is often a sign of fear or anxiety. So something that could look like a yawn to us is actually something that's signaling like an interaction that's full of like tension or trying to show off one's canines to intimidate a rival. Part of this facial feature that I'm describing is something called a lip flip. And this is when males, I mean, most of the time it's males because they have those big old canines. They flip their lips up so that their gums are showing and their canines look way bigger. It's a part of aggressive behavior. And submissive males who are like, oh, dang, those are some big canines. I don't want to mess with this guy. They will respond by either just fleeing or presenting their hindquarters, which is, I mean, if you've seen dogs do it, it's a submissive move. All right, olfactory communication. This is the use of scent to communicate. Females might secrete chemicals from their anogenital region, which indicates their reproductive status. Dogs have something similar, which is why they smell one another's butts. They've got some glands down there that indicate something. Male and female squirrel monkeys are known to engage in something called urine washing, I know, which is when an individual urinates on their hands and feet, and then spreads it all over their body, which can be used to mark trails for others to follow, control their body temperature, so kind of like how we sweat, and it cools us down. It can be a dominance display, or it can communicate reproductive state if they're a female. Male lemurs do something similar. They've got scent glands on their wrist and on their chests, and they wipe it on their tails and then wag their tails around in the air in aggressive interactions to like intimidate others. But they can also do the same kind of thing to attract females or mark their territory. So olfactory, like we're not really good at differentiating scents like that, particularly like hormonal sense. So this is kind of hard for us to understand how there can be so many nuanced uses, but primates with large snouts with many different receptors, they can differentiate these things. The final mode of communication is tactile communication. If you remember tactile pads on our fingers, which is a primate trait, then that will bring you to this. Tactile communication is communicating through touch. It's used to comfort or reassure another member of the group. It could be part of courtship or mating, say, hey, I really like you. And it can be used to establish dominance in alliances. Grooming is probably the one I'd like to emphasize here. It is an important and rather enjoyable form of tactile communication for all primates, us included. If you like getting your hair done, that's probably why. If you like getting your back scratched, that's probably why. It has benefits like removing parasites and debris from fur, but it can also repair interactions like, I'm sorry, I did that. I was just hangry. That's one I use a lot. And it reaffirms alliances like, no, we're cool. We're going out hunting tomorrow or whatever. All right, that was it for today. Sorry it was a bit of a longer one. Thank you so much for staying around with me. I will see you in the next lecture.